Welcome, Fulton families. I'm Brian Noyes, the Chief Communications Officer for Fulton County Schools. And with me today is Dr. Mike Looney, our Superintendent, and Dr. Gema Whitaker, Deputy Chief Academic Officer for the school system. Thank you both for being here today.
Oh, it's good to be with you, Brian and Gema. It's great to talk about some of the innovative practices we're engaging in Fulton County Schools and our plans for the future.
Yes, the future in front of us.
Excellent. And we're digital, so we're having this conversation together, but online, as is the typical these days. But the topic today is K-8 schools. We're discussing the idea of a K-8 model in Fulton County schools. Dr. Looney, can you talk about what that means, kind of define what a K-8 model is?
Sure. As we've been doing research looking at innovative and successful practices across the country, we were interested in exploring adding a K-8 to our portfolio of schools. And a K-8 is exactly what it sounds like, and that is a school designed, built, and configured for students grades kindergarten through the 8th grade. And there are a myriad of reasons why we would want to do something like that here in Fulton County Schools.
Talk about that. I mean, what are the reasons? What are the benefits for doing something like this versus what the traditional model is?
Well, I think the easier answer is why would we not, based on the overwhelming evidence of why it's a good idea.
Well, people aren't familiar with it, right? So they need to hear what those things are because they may not have seen that before.
Well, our primary mission is academic achievement, helping students be successful during their schooling career so they can be successful as adults. And there is all kinds of research that shows that students that attend K-8 schools do better academically. Now, Gema, I know as an example, you have been studying this since we started talking about it, and you can probably list off the top of your head all kinds of studies.
Yes, Dr. Looney, when I think about it, I think about a study out of Texas, actually, where they observed 628 schools. So that's both K-8 as well as traditional middle schools. And over 5 years, they saw a higher average passing rate in reading and in math on their state exams in Texas. So that's just right in our backyard, if you will, but it really demonstrates that the K-8 model does make a difference in the academic achievement of students.
Have they seen that in any other parts of the country, Dr. Whitaker?
Yes. So I alluded to Texas, but when you think about multiple metropolitan areas, such as Baltimore, such as Philadelphia, such as Milwaukee, all of these areas are large urban districts, and this K-8 model has proven that it's more successful. One, due to the high poverty areas, but then also the mobility of the students. Think about Baltimore, for example. In their K-8, their students scored higher in reading, language arts, as well as math. And their leaders, the leaders had very clear, very high expectations for their students. And similarly in Philadelphia, it was about the reading, it was about their math, but also their science. So when you're thinking about the academic needs of students, all of those core areas, it's evident. Milwaukee, for example, also spoke to the extracurricular activities that students participated at a higher level and a higher degree, their demonstration of leadership skills. And quite frankly, students were less likely to be bullied in a K-8 school. So, that's all around the nation. But Brian, tell me, what areas would you also want to know a little more about?
So, you talked about the academics and a little bit about the culture. How does a K-8 change the culture of a community and these kids?
Yes, the K-8 changes the culture and the community of students because there is less transition. A student knows that if I walk into this building in kindergarten, I will be surrounded by the same trusted adults all the way through 8th grade. The parents know who they need to go to, and the parents are also known. So it's that adage of how do I know and how do I become known? And that is really how the community takes hold of the school, wraps its arms around the school to usher the children where they need to
You know,
be.
I remember as a dad the trepidation I felt when my daughter, my youngest child, went from elementary school to middle school. So in the district that I was working at the time, we had multiple elementary schools feed into a large middle school. So the students that would transition from her school to that middle school would be, 100 or two. And then they would be combined with hundreds of kids from other schools. And so my daughter, while she had a few friends, she really didn't have any contacts with adults at the school, at the middle school. She had a few friends, and because the school was so large, she may or may not have ended up in a class with people that she knew. There was so much anxiety right at the onset of puberty versus staying in the same school where your kindergarten teacher and your first grade teacher and your fourth grade teacher are still there and still know you. And the friends that you establish over that long period of time, it's just tremendous.
You would know the principal or the other school leaders and other cafeteria, custodial, other support staff would be the same.
Absolutely. You would be served by the same person in the lunchroom line for that entire experience where they know you by name. They likely know your birthday and your siblings' names and birthdays. And so it's really about creating an environment for success. And that's what the research says. It's all about relationships, and we can form long-lasting, effective relationships when we have students for that length of time.
Dr. Leaney, you have the lesson, the transition from the younger grades to the older grades, but you also now are fostering in this kind of model, wouldn't it create a lot of interaction between those grades? And is there good and bad in that?
Well, in my experience, I've led some districts where we implemented K-8, and I have personally seen 8th graders going down to kindergarten to read books to kindergartners, serving as good role models, good readers for children that are learning to read. Conversely, the kindergartners have somebody to look up to that's demonstrating the leadership that Dr. Whitaker talked about. They get to see, the school athletic stars wearing their jersey on game day. And so it just builds this connectivity. And to be honest with you, Dr. Whitaker was talking about bullying decreases, and I remember having conversations about fear about bullying little kids with big kids. But what I have seen is the older students in the school actually become sort of parent, big brother figures to the younger ones. They protect them. They care for them. They carry their book bags down the hallway. They make sure they get on the right bus. And so it's really about building connectivity, and it works. It works socially, emotionally. It works from an academic perspective, and quite frankly, we are living in a district with declining enrollment, particularly at the elementary level, and it makes good sense from a facilities management perspective.
So, what does that mean, facilities management perspective? How does that better?
Well, instead of building new schools, we redesign, add, and refurbish and reutilize buildings that are not fully occupied. We create effective learning spaces for students. We save taxpayer dollars with new construction and land acquisition, and we save operational dollars. Instead of having 2 lunchrooms, one at the middle school and one at the elementary school, we have one. Half the staff, half the space. We have 1 administrator instead of 2 administrators. Some of the redundancies that we create by having K-5 schools and 6-8 schools and then high schools are eliminated by having a K-8 model. We're not talking about doing K-8 in all of our buildings. We're talking about adding it to our portfolio of schools where it makes sense.
That's a great point. And so Fulton County is pretty diverse. Dr. Whitaker, where would it make sense in Fulton County?
Brian, I think that it would make sense anywhere and everywhere, But I would say it would definitely make sense where we have concentrations of mobility and where you see that our students need that level of continuity and less transition. So if there are areas where there are higher poverty, the K-8 model, as we've seen from the research, really does make a difference in the lives of the students because one, they have higher achievement, they have higher attendance, and then also they have lower suspension rates. That's coming out of just in our neighborhood of Miami-Dade. And so when I think about what this would do for Fulton County schools and for our community, and most importantly, for our children, it's going to make a difference. There is a strong sense of community, and it's one of the best ways.
I'd like to bring another point into the conversation. I kind of made it a while ago, and that is it makes sense when we're looking at surplusing a building or reconstructing a building. If we're going to invest millions of dollars of taxpayers' money in building new buildings or replacing existing buildings because they're aged out, then what a prime time for us to look at the model that we're using and asking ourselves the question, is what we had or currently have best for our students and community moving forward? In light of new research, in light of growing demands on school districts, and in light of the limited taxpayer dollars that we use for school construction and operations.
That's great. Are there any other points that we haven't discussed about this option that we need to make sure we're letting the community be aware of?
Well, I think the question at hand is really this. What's best for students? We know that in some cases, a K-8 school is a really wise choice for academic outcomes, for social emotional, for reduction in anxiety and discipline, suspensions, and for increased success at the high school level. The research is clear. On the more human side of it, the circumference, or the radius of the school shrinks. The boundaries of a school shrink because of the K-8 configuration, because you have more students across multiple years in a smaller radius of space. And so think about it from, I'll use cheerleading as an example. A typical school, a middle school, might have 15 or 20 cheerleaders. And if you have 1,000 middle schoolers in that school, what percentage of those young folks can make their cheerleading team? Or what percentage of them can make the football or baseball team? Versus if you have fewer students, the same number of cheerleading spots, the same number of football slots still exist, but there's higher odds of actually making the team. So participation increases.
Just to make sure we understand that, what you're describing is the class size teacher to student ratio stays the same, but the number of third graders or the number of eighth grade classes are fewer, so that you have less within that grade band at the school, and that's why that's less.
Absolutely true.
Yeah, great. Dr.
And that, Brian, and to Dr. Looney's point, that's how you create that continuity, that community for those learners. It becomes intangible.
Wonderful. And the community is smaller, right? So and you said the circumference radius is also from the distance of the building. So the amount of people in the community are closer, physical neighbors.
One thing that we learned many, many years ago, and I think many places have forgotten, is that community schools are effective. When you have a community school, everybody is invested in the school, and you don't lose. We see this in PTO, PTA involvement. So in the elementary schools, we have a high level of PTO, PTA participation rate. It dwindles at the middle school level, honestly, and it dwindles further at the high school level. But if your child went to that same school from kindergarten all the way through 8th grade, you don't have to learn the PTO, PTA of another school. You get to stay there and be engaged for that entire duration.
And they increase that continuity for those middle school years where like you said, sometimes that can drop off. Because in high school years, it gets replaced with activities, sports or band or, theater or something. But those middle school years, this continues with that parent connection too.
The last thing we need to do is treat our students that are going through life changes, learning independence, going through puberty as adults. They're not. They're still children. And a small community K-8 school allows them to remain children for a little bit longer.
Well, that's great, Dr. Looney. Dr. Whitaker, any final points or items that we need to share?
No, I think that we have summed it up. I think that this, as far as a K-8 school, would be beneficial anywhere in Fulton, but I think that there are some communities that would benefit even greater than others.
Well, great. Well, we look forward to having that conversation out in our county, our district, our communities over the coming months and years. So thank you both for your time and sharing this information.